Several years ago, I was with a colleague in Orlando, Florida. It was around Christmas time, and we were doing some business while having brunch in a hotel in Orlando. And in walked a group of seniors. They were wearing red hats, and they had bells, and they were singing Christmas tunes. And next to us sat an older couple. They must have been in their late 80s, early 90s, and they were holding hands and smooching. Well, being unmarried and looking at how happy they were, I just leaned over and I said, "Excuse me, if you don't mind my asking, what's the secret to a successful marriage?" Well, the gentleman took a look at me and he says, "Well, I'll tell you. You may not know it by looking at me now, but 60 years ago, I was quite a looker. I had just gotten out of the Navy and I met Marilyn here and she kept pestering me to marry her. And I kept saying, I just got out of the Navy. I'm going to need to think about it." Well, she kept proposing to me and asking me to marry her. And finally, she said to me, "You're not going to know what it's like to marry me until you do it. So why don't you think about it while we're married?" I thought that made sense. So we did. And 60 years later, I'm still thinking about it. And they giggled and they laughed all the way through their cheesecake. I tell you this story because that one story has made me and other salespeople millions of dollars. I used to use that story at the moment of truth whenever a customer said, "Shari, this all looks good, but we need to think about it." And I would look at them and say, "Let me share something with you." Then I'd tell them the story and I'd say, "You're not going to know what it's like. I was selling real estate to have this beautiful piece of real estate on the ocean or in the mountains until you own it. Why don't you think about it while you own it?" And that story almost always worked to get people past that resistance. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Shari Levitin. Facts tell, stories sell. Welcome to What's Your Story? We've all heard that facts tell, stories sell. In fact, Brené Brown says facts are simply stories with soul. But here's the thing I've found in my 30 years of coaching salespeople and coaching sales leaders and coaching business people all over the world. Most people don't know the secrets of telling a good story. They don't know a story from an anecdote. Their stories are too long. Their stories aren't powerful. They haven't thought about it and they haven't strategized their stories. So what we're going to do today is we're going to do a few things. We're going to look at why telling stories. Why should we tell stories in the first place? Number 2, what is an actual sales story? Number 3, what is the structure for a powerful sales story? Next, we're going to look at the 5 rules of an effective sales story, and you need all 5. And finally, we're going to look at do's and don'ts so you can take your storytelling to story selling. So let's go ahead and get started. Now, I'm going to give you 6 reasons why stories are more effective than just facts. Number 1, stories increase trust. And what's the most important thing we do in sales is we need to increase trust. I always say trust is made of 5 components: empathy, competency, reliability, and integrity. And stories, way more than facts, increase trust. Why? Well, turns out there's a molecule that's released when we start to build empathy for a character or somebody else. It's called oxytocin, dubbed the moral molecule. And when we start listening to somebody or bonding with somebody, connecting with somebody, we actually release the hormone oxytocin. It's the same hormone that mothers release when they're breastfeeding, or that's released when you are falling in love, or when you meet a salesperson, or when a customer meets you and starts to like you and believe in you. It's the trust hormone. And a good story releases that oxytocin, so it builds trust. Number 2, stories create emotion. Now, why is that so important? Well, I said earlier, facts tell and emotions sell. But why is that? We all think we're making logical, rational decisions. I have news for you. You don't. If you were to look at a picture of the brain, We think that we're making these logical decisions, but the truth is this: human beings make subconscious, emotional, and often irrational decisions in one part of our brains, and we justify them in a different part of our brains after the fact. To prove this, researchers have found when somebody's suffering from stroke or some other debilitating event, and if they lose the emotional part of their brain, they can't make any decisions at all. I mean, not even the smallest of decisions like, should I have a pizza or a hamburger tonight? So we think we're making rational decisions, but they're all emotional. And stories hit the emotions of our customers. So if you want to influence a customer, you need to influence them emotionally. Even if your prospect is interested in the facts of your offering, they won't be inspired to act without their emotions leading the charge. They may think the solution's right in their head, but they'll only take action. You'll only create urgency if they feel it in their heart. Number 3, why are stories more effective than facts? Well, they enhance credibility. I mean, think about it for a minute. We're in a social media economy. Since the advent of social media, the way we promote our products and services has changed dramatically. We're in a world of I'll have what you're having. The thinking is that since you like it and I like you, or I'm connected to you, it must be good for me. In fact, if you and I are virtual friends, you're 27% more likely to find credibility in a product or service that I recommend. You're no different. Think about it. You want to go to a restaurant, what's the first thing you do? You look at Yelp reviews. Is it good? Oh no, these 3 strangers don't like it. I'm not going there for Chinese food. It doesn't make any sense, but this is how we are. And so what happens is when we tell a story about somebody else somewhere else who likes the product or service, we go, oh, that's interesting. You're supposed to like your product. I can't say the product is great because of this. No, but if George over there used the product, if George is like me, it must be a good product for me. So number 3, stories enhance credibility. Number 4, stories can actually increase the value of your products or services. How can a story do that? A simple story? You bet. There was an experiment done in 2009 by Rob Walker and Josh Glenn. And what they did is they bought 100 ordinary items off of eBay, and they spent only $1.50 a piece for these items, a total of $150. Then what they did is they hired a group of authors to write stories about each item. Now, I'm telling you, these were very ordinary items like a shoe, a horse's head, a thermometer, a bowl, very ordinary. Well, what happened is each author wrote a story, a fictitious story, about each one of the items. Then they placed them back on eBay. You guessed it. They resold the items for an average of $350 a piece for a total of $3,500. That's quite an increase. Now, I am not suggesting that you make up stories about products, but I'll bet if you look at your product or service and you think about what stories can I tell about either the product, the service, the wood that was used, the this that was used, who used it, or perhaps even a story about your founder, it will increase the value of your products or services. Do you have a good story as to why your company was even started? Why, the other day I was just talking to a potential customer in the car industry, and I looked them up online, as we should all do, and you know what I found? They had been in business since 1848, and the founder of this automotive company started with horses and carriages. Now that story really affected me. Now, they could have just said we've been in business since 1848, but the fact that he started selling horses and carriages, it gave me this whole image. And they talked about the struggle, how he came from nowhere. Well, I'll tell you, I'm buying my car from the horse and carriage man.